talk a little bit about Ashoka's hybrid value chain, but before I get into that, I'll just give a very quick overview of Ashoka as an organization. And as a lot of you may know, Ashoka was really the first organization to start talking about social entrepreneurs and to start talking about the field of social entrepreneurship. And this was back in 1981, so almost 30 years ago. And for most of Ashoka's history, for most of the last 30 years, its primary focus has been in identifying these kinds of people that David has been talking about, identifying Victoria Hales, who have a potentially transformative and systems-changing idea, and then investing in those people, typically at the launch stage, where a small amount of money can really have a tremendous impact. But about 10 years ago, as the field of social entrepreneurship has really been evolving and exploding, Ashoka started thinking about new ways. And now that it has a network of about 3,000 fellows, which are social entrepreneurs, again, like Victoria Hale, in about 70 countries. But Ashoka started thinking that, look, it's not enough just to invest in individual entrepreneurs anymore. We have to start thinking about ways to leverage this community. We have this tremendous alumni network of 3,000 people, many of them tied to innovative organizations, or sometimes more than one organization, with ideas that have really been tested and sometimes reach national or global impact. But how can we sort of build on this foundation of social entrepreneurs, and what can we start thinking about next? So about 10 years ago, one whole new arena that Ashoka started looking into was how to develop partnerships across sectors. And this is where a hybrid value chain comes in. And the goal really here, specifically working with the private sector, there's always been a natural fit between business entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs because they're both entrepreneurs. And they both share a lot of the same qualities that David was talking about in terms of relentless pursuit of a particular vision, in terms of being concerned first and foremost with practical implementation of the idea. So it was often a natural fit when you brought a social entrepreneur and a business entrepreneur together, and they'd really see eye to eye. But there's no question that there is still sort of a chasm between the business sectors and what Ashoka calls the citizen sector, or the nonprofit sector, or civil society, because the goals are often divergent goals. The kinds of resources that these sectors bring to the table for a long time were hugely imbalanced, and they still are imbalanced in terms of just sheer monetary resources. But I think what's been changing is that the citizen sector, first of all, has been growing. It's grown about 300% in the United States since 1981, and people like me really see it as an opportunity to become involved in work that is lucrative and challenging, but also in line with our values. So I think the gap in innovation between these two sectors has really been closing. But nonetheless, there's a gap there. So what the hybrid value chain has been trying to do for the last 10 years is essentially to bridge this gap and to figure out how can we creatively leverage the strengths of both the business community and the nonprofit sector, of the citizen sector, and apply that towards certain particular kinds of problems. Specifically, how can we leverage it towards the creation of new markets for the 2 to 3 billion people that are not really participating in the formal economy. So why don't we, so I don't even have the one clicker, so I should probably have it. Well, actually, we go to the next slide. This is this is a fuller slide. Let me just. So this is sorry, I'm going to click through a couple of these because I don't need to use all these slides. But I just want to give a specific example of what we mean by the hybrid value chain and what it's doing in a practical case. So what I'll talk about quickly is a story of a small farmer, and not just one small farmer, but many small farmers. So this is Pedro. And he's a small farmer in Mexico, and like many small farmers, he doesn't have access to the kinds of materials and technologies that he needs to increase the yields from his farm. And in fact, many of his costs are for agrochemical fertilizers that makes him vulnerable to oil prices. There are more than 2 million small farmers in Mexico just like him. These are people that are working in farms of essentially less than 5 hectares. And the key technology that they lack is irrigation. Right? So if they had access to basic irrigation technology, they'd be able to increase the yields on their farms 2 to 3-fold. They'd be able to start producing crops that are higher value crops. And they also substitute to something like drip irrigation away from simply flooding their fields, which has really adverse environmental effects. But the problem is, and there are companies in Mexico, of course, that sell irrigation equipment. One of them is called Amanco. But these companies' business model essentially does not include all of these people working on farms of 5 hectares or smaller. Right? So they're selling irrigation technologies to huge industrial farms. And they don't see working with customers like Hydro as being particularly cost effective or profitable. But Ashoka saw something different. And when we talk about leveraging the work of our social entrepreneurs, and when we talk about creating a systemic change and creating shifts that are actually stable, creating this new stable equilibrium, Ashoka saw this as an opportunity. And so social entrepreneurs essentially acted as a broker in Mexico between Amanco and these small farmers, pulling in citizen sector organizations, pulling in social entrepreneurs who had both worked in rural agriculture and agricultural development, who had worked in microfinance with small farmers, and saying, look, there is some real untapped potential here that can create not just social value, but actual economic value for Amanco. And as it turns out, there's a market of about $56 million for Amanco, that would require just a small shift in their business model, which would require them to start actually offering their drip irrigation equipment in a smaller business, with a smaller package. But of course, they couldn't do this alone. And so they needed to have social entrepreneurs from Ashoka and other citizen sector organizations in Mexico essentially broker this deal. And the reason they had to do so is because they were actually able to aggregate demand from these farmers and allow them to access certain financial resources and credit so that they can have a loan so they can actually get this equipment. So if you look at what this looks like, begins to look like, it's what Ashoka calls this ecosystem of partners. So you've got buyers who integrate farmers to their supply chain and provide them with better access directly to the markets. They get rid of unwanted intermediaries that are essentially skimming off all the margins. You've got providers of technology who provide solutions that already exist. I mean, this technology is being produced, it's simply being adapted now to small farmers. You've got financial institutions who give them a chance to invest in their own growth through particular funds, and social entrepreneurs who are helping bring all this together and create this sort of integrated. So there's already been some really significant impact in Mexico. 500 to 300% increase in the production of that farmers can expect with just basic irrigation technology. And in some cases, it's doubling or even tripling their income from what it was before. And of course, this is also creating value for the business because they now have $56 million market that they weren't accessing before. But it's also creating value in terms of knowledge. It's giving them a whole new access to a particular market that was not access to before. And what Bill Drayton thinks is that the opportunity for businesses like Amanco to get involved in this early on is actually sort of shooting them up the learning curve. And he says that businesses that aren't at least thinking about these kinds of cross-sector models in the future are going to be committing strategy malpractice, he thinks, because there's so much untapped potential in terms of reaching out to these markets. And there's a tremendous ability to create, again, not just social but economic value. And I think it's interesting to what David was saying about moving away from charity. So this is an opportunity, a specific opportunity for doing exactly that, which is not simply waiting for the business sector and corporations to engage in corporate social responsibility. It's not simply looking for them to set up a foundation or looking for them to somehow pay back society, but it's actually giving them an opportunity to create new value. And within a system that, again, is essentially linking business interests, business competencies with those of the citizen sector and creating hence sort of hybrid value chain in the middle. So I think the farming example is just one of many examples. And we don't have a lot of time here today, but you've got examples from the healthcare industry and housing industry. And so, of course, you can go onto the Ashoka's website to look at hybrid value chain. And there's also an article that just recently came out in the Harvard Business Review that goes into much greater detail about the potential for these kinds of partnerships. One thing that I'll close with this, that Diana Wells, who's Ashoka's president, says that attracted her to Ashoka and the social entrepreneurship more broadly is that it allowed her and continues to allow her to see the world through a prism of solutions. instead of just sort of a growing litany of problems. Because we have this regular access and contact with social entrepreneurs, and there's just tremendous inspiration that you get out of this, because you're seeing, these are people who are looking at these problems and they're seeing opportunities in these problems. I think that the hybrid value chain is a whole new arena that over the last 10 years in particular, and of course it's not just Ashoka, there are many other organizations doing similar things, from Acumen Fund to others, but who recognize that there's this whole new opportunity for value creation and for and at a fundamental level, I think it's because you're bringing more eyes to the problems, and therefore more eyes looking at the possible opportunities. And I think that's one of the best ways that you're going to actually find and develop some of the most effective solutions. So that hopefully gives you some quick overview of hybrid value chain. And if you have any questions about it or about Ashoka more generally, I'm happy to answer them later.